Today, I'm talking with Matt, a video game developer from Amsterdam, working on Fungal Front. Matt, do you want to start off by telling me about the game?
Yeah, sure. So my wife and I were building a sci-fi real-time strategy game, as John mentioned, called Fungal Front. It's set in the year 2062, when humanity is scrambling to find a cure for a superbug, which is onset by the overprescription of antibiotics. The humans have discovered a fungal planet named Mycopia, where they found a life-giving serum believed to hold the keys to the cure. And of course, on their arrival, they realize they're not there alone, and that's where the player's journey begins.
How did you come up with the idea for this game?
I've always wanted to make an RTS ever since I saw StarCraft 1. That's actually what got me into coding in the first place. Uh, yeah, I kind of started building it a couple of years ago just as an RTS. Then my wife got involved when she saw that I didn't really have much of a storyline going. I was just following the standard mold most people tend to go for, which is just tanks and army men fighting each other with no real depth to the story. I was going for just a post-apocalyptic, everyone's blown each other up, and now we're going to fight. But my wife got involved, and yeah, she had some ideas. She's always loved mushrooms, so yeah, so she primarily came up with most of the story.
How are you two splitting up the work on this?
My wife is the artistic one, so I'm not very artistic. I'm mainly technically minded. My wife is a brilliant artist, and she does most of the shroomy characters. So, of course, we've got the shroomies, which are the alien species, and then we've got the humans. And then we've also got an artist called Sci-fi on Twitter. His name's Jordan. He's doing the majority of the human models. And my wife is doing most of the art related stuff, like making models for the shroomies, painting textures on the terrain, designing terrain. So anything art wise, my wife will have the final say. I just make it work.
Got it. One thing that stood out right away with the game is just how vivid and alien and sci-fi it looks, and so I guess that's largely her design work, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to take credit for for any of that, but yeah, it's mostly her contribution.
You list the game, it's described as a deterministic real-time strategy. What does that mean?
Right. So yeah, actually, it's good you mentioned that. When I started building the game, I used the standard mono behavior in Unity, and I got that working really well. I was using Photon Fusion for the networking, and yeah, the game works pretty well. But after a while, I realized that if I wanted to get the same level of competitive gameplay as a game like StarCraft 2, I'm going to have to go with the deterministic engine. And what that means is gameplay is simulated on both players' computers in an identical fashion. So instead of sending the unit positions of all of the units all of the time back and forth, so normally, let me explain. Normally, you'd have a server and a client in any networking topology. And what I had before was one player would be the server and the other would be the client. And that means that all of the game simulation would be happening on the server, and all of the information would then have to be passed to the client the whole time. So every time a unit moves, it would have to send the new position of that unit to the client so that the client knows where to move the unit. With a deterministic engine, you rather would just send the input commands. So, for instance, player right clicked at this position. And then it would simulate it on both the local machine and the remote machine. And because they're deterministic, meaning they will both have the exact same response and result, it doesn't need to send any of the other information across the network. And that makes the gameplay a lot more seamless, if that makes sense.
Makes a lot of sense, and it answers a lot of the questions that had about how the multiplayer works and all
Great.
that. So, how challenging was that, or does Photon help with that aspect, or is there another tool?
Yeah, so I used Photon for two parts. So Photon Fusion is the standard networking engine that they offer, which you can just bolt onto your Unity project. And that would be for the client server relationship. And then they've got Photon Quantum, which is used for the deterministic engine. And unfortunately, that is its own game engine, which happens to just use Unity for rendering. So it was a bit of a steep learning curve. I say that, but I've really made some significant progress over the past month and a half. And I only started with it about a month and a half ago. And we've already got a fully functional game with reusing a lot of the same artwork. I've had a few playtests with one of my friends, and yeah, the gameplay is really much better now. Uh,
I see. So you've only been with the new engine a month and a half, but not the whole game
no,
you've been
yeah,
working
the
on.
whole game is about 2.5 years. But the Photon Quantum engine, yeah, I started with it about a month and a half ago. I did a course in Udemy, and that taught me everything I needed to know. And yeah, I think I've got a good grasp on it now.
Very cool. So that's interesting. It uses Unity, but are you still coding in Unity, or are you coding in this whole other tool
Yeah,
now?
it's quite interesting how they've split it up. So really, they do all of the physics simulations on the quantum side. So that will be managed in separate scripts. And then you've got your standard motor behavior scripts, which are used for anything on the view side, they call it. So anything to do with the UI interactions. If you want to drag a box to select your units, for instance, and then right click somewhere, you will send those commands through the regular mono behavior scripts, and you'll send what's called an event or a signal or a command. They've split them up in different ways, which are used for different things. From the view, you'd normally send a command to the simulation, and then the simulation would perform the necessary actions. So it's kind of split up into two parts.
You mentioned getting into programming from StarCraft 1. Does that mean you've been programming for a lot longer?
Yeah, I started coding when I was about 10. So I'm 38 now, so it's quite a while. I started with Visual Basic 5, I think it was, and then Visual Basic 6, and yeah, then I learned a whole bunch of languages after that. I actually, as I say, I got into coding because I wanted to learn how to make a game like StarCraft. Little did I know I was choosing one of the most difficult genres to build for. So, of course, that took a bit of a while to realize that it wasn't going to be a walk in the park. I made maybe 10 games when I was about 10, 11, and 12. Then my hard drive crashed and I lost everything, and that kind of demotivated me for a while. So I didn't really do much game dev for a while until I restarted probably 4 years ago. But I've been coding ever since. So I mean, my career is in coding. I code every day. So yeah.
That's interesting. It sounds almost like similar backgrounds. I started also, I'm 39 now. It was in the 90s using QBasic is what I started with.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Um, Now, professionally, what kind of programming are you doing?
So I'm a full stack developer. So I build holiday package systems, that do flights and hotel combination type things. And yeah, I've been in the Netherlands for about 3.5 years doing that. So that's my primary work, and then game dev is in my free time. Before that, I ran a couple of companies back in South Africa, where I'm originally from. Um, my most recent company that I worked for was a company I built and ran for 13 years, which was to do with financial transaction processing. Um, yeah, I've done quite a few different types of systems. I also built an accounting system. Um, yeah, it is a lot.
What happened with that company?
I
Did you
sold
sell
it.
it?
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah, I sold it. That's what
amazing.
financed me being able to move to the Netherlands.
That's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, I sold another company before that as well that I'd also built. Yeah, a couple of them. But yeah, they all served varying purposes. One of them, I actually did a lot of consulting, which taught me a lot. I had a lot of clients who just wanted systems built, and I would just build them on an ad hoc basis.
Hmm. Are you still doing you? So you're still doing that as a full time when you're doing the game development on the side?
That's right. Yeah.
Before, so you worked on games a long time ago. Do you have any other kind of recent games right before Fungal Front, or is this you getting back into it?
Yeah, I've built a couple of smaller games, mostly just mess around games. Like I made a 3D version of Free Ski or Ski Free, and made a game like similar to Grand Theft Auto where you just really walk around and just slap people. I've made, yeah, just a bunch of random games, really. Nothing that really felt right to publish. Um, I thought it's a lot of fun to build smaller games with small scopes because it's nice to finish something. And I finished a few of them, but if I publish something, I want to make sure that it's a game I really care about because I don't want to publish it and then not support it and not keep adding updates, giving updates, fixing bugs, things like that. I've realized from the previous systems that I've built in real life, you don't just release something and then it's out there. It's now your full-time job. You know you're going to have to take care of that game. And if you want to keep the gamers happy, you're going to have to keep working on it. So I wanted to make sure that it was a game I've really always wanted to make, which is an RTS.
Are you working with a publisher for this game at all?
I've got one publisher who's interested in publishing the game, but I haven't yet decided if that's the route I want to take. Um, I like to work with autonomy as much as possible. I know that some publishers like to give a lot of direction. Um, it's not necessarily something that I'm opposed to, but at the moment, it seems to be going relatively well with the marketing. I don't do a ton of marketing, but we're up to about 500 wish lists at the moment. We're working with another streamer who regularly posts content for our game, which seems to give us really nice spikes in the wish list count. So, yeah, I guess we'll see how the demo release goes for Steam Next Fest. And I think that should give an indication of as to whether we'll need help from a publisher.
Is there a demo out now that people can play?
Not yet. We're planning on, well, we're hoping to release for Steam Next Fest in June. It may be the subsequent Next Fest after that, but the way things are looking at the moment, it does seem like we'll be ready for June to release a competitive 1v1 demo that people can try out and get a feel for.
That's pretty close. Have you been working with any playtesters in the meantime?
We've got a couple of playtesters lined up who we have promised to give early releases to. But at the moment, there's someone else on our team who just does playtesting. That's the friend I was talking about, James. So he and I normally will have a session once a day where we just play against each other, kill each other's units, build some stuff, see how the game feels, and just refine what we can. And then we generally just come up with points on a Trello board that we think need attention. And yeah, we just believe in just iterating over and over again until it feels right.
In StarCraft, they have the three different races. Do you have different races or are they all the same?
We've got, yeah, so we've got the Shroomies, which are the alien species. Well, they're not alien to Mycopia, but they're alien to the humans. And then we'll have the humans. And at a later phase, we're thinking about bringing in kind of a robotic AI kind of species, but we haven't yet solidified that. We thought that might be good to introduce after early access. So kind of have early access as just the Shroomies versus the humans, and then look at bringing in a third race at a later point.
Is it only multiplayer or are you going to have a campaign?
We'll definitely have a campaign. Initially, we were planning on making it only single player. With a campaign, we believe that the story has enough depth to carry a full campaign. But in order to keep myself motivated, I have to stay true to which genre and style I prefer the most. I play StarCraft every single day, probably 4 or 5 matches a day. So, you know, for me to not make it competitive would just make it not enough fun for me to build. So yeah, I'm focusing right now on the competitive aspect, but we certainly have a campaign lined up. We've planned a few missions already, And we'll definitely be releasing those with early access as well, so it won't just be the competitive play.
Since you mentioned StarCraft, have you tried their co-op mode?
The Archon?
No, not the Archon.
Okay,
The co-op mode is kind of like playing campaign with two people, and
right.
they each have their own base, and you do co-op against the
Okay,
computer.
right. I haven't yet tried that, no. I'm sure that could be fun as well. We definitely would be interested in bringing in co-op as well. I've played co-op in some other games, but yeah, I think that could be a fun addition. Um,
I really like it, and I think a lot of other people really like it because it eliminates the competitive aspect against and the stress, that you
yeah,
have with like playing against another player.
right.
So it's a
Yeah, I think to be honest, the biggest aversion people have to competitive gameplay is just a sense of feeling lost. So you start playing the game, you want to just get accustomed to how things are set up, how things work, and within 2 minutes it's over. You're being rushed by a bunch of reapers, or you've got someone cannon rushing you, and some ridiculous stuff is happening, and you have no idea how to counter it. So we'd like to spend a lot of time onboarding the players. When it comes to early access, we really want to ensure that players understand exactly what they're doing and what's involved in building a base, building up some units, doing your upgrades, walling things off. We really want to try and do well on the onboarding, because I think a lot of games have fallen short there. So I think that's the biggest barrier to entry for most players. It's not that the game genre is boring or complex, it's mostly just onboarding. And I think it's a similar thing with building a game. So I always thought that it was, well, later on, I thought it was going to be very difficult to build an RTS, until I started to figure out how all the pieces fit together. And then it became a lot more simple. And now that's why I'm doing the tutorial series as well, so that I can try and simplify it for other people, so that it doesn't seem so scary to get into. And the same thing applies with an RTS. You don't want it to feel difficult. You want to understand what makes it competitive, instead of trying to figure out what's going on before, yeah, getting killed.
You mentioned the tutorials that you're making. These are the Unity RTS
Right.
tutorials. What's your plan with those?
Yeah. So, as I say, I really just wanted to make sure that anyone who wanted to make an RTS but wasn't sure where to start had a good foundation, had a good understanding of what would be involved in building their own game. When I looked a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, there were no tutorials on building an RTS. Um, no to, well, almost zero. And I saw recently that one or two people had started some series of building their own tutorial series on how to build an RTS, and I think that's great. But I didn't feel like they were simple enough. I think that I've been guilty of this in the past as well, but I think a lot of coders overcomplicate things when trying to explain them to people who aren't that experienced. And I believe everything complex can be explained simply. I'm stealing that from Richard Feynman, of course, uh, but I do think that's possible. And so that's really my goal, is to try and explain everything involved in building an RTS as simply as possible, while trying to teach some good foundations of what decent looking code looks like, that's not messy and all over the place. And at the same time, kind of teaching them the ins and outs of Unity, how to do the smallest of things. So even when trying to move an object or scale an object or rotate it, I generally try to say what I'm doing. So I'll say I'm pressing W now so that we can move. I'm pressing E and then we can rotate. So I try to explain things as best as possible. My goal is to finish the series once we have implemented multiplayer gameplay as well. So I mentioned at the beginning of the series that I would be doing building construction, unit production, some upgrades, of course, attack logic, and then eventually at the end, we'll be adding multiplayer.
Do you happen to be familiar with David Heinemeier Hansen,
Uh,
DHH?
DHH, yes, right. He's the founder of Creative Ruby on Rails, right?
Yes, exactly.
Right.
he has a book called Rework, and he talks about it's mostly about this concept of byproducts.
Hmm.
And that's what your work reminded me of, where it's like you're making this game, and by making these tutorials with what you've learned, you're you're leveraging the same work you're doing in another way. And if you were to, for example, package it up when you were done as a Udemy course, you've created a byproduct kind of along the way out of the same skills
Right.
and the same work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Um, have you ever considered a Udemy course yourself?
Well, what do you mean considered it? Considered making
Like
one?
making one?
Yeah, well, I'm thinking once so I'm also using the tutorial that I'm doing now as kind of a learning process of refining my process of explaining things, doing my own editing, and trying to figure out how pacing works, just figuring out the basics of how to make a tutorial series on YouTube, which I'm offering for free. And then my goal is once I've completed that, I'm hoping I now know enough about Photon Quantum to be able to make a Udemy course on how to build your game, an RTS, and with a deterministic engine. So yeah, that's kind of the plan.
That's cool. I have a couple Udemy courses that I put up a few years ago. It's like
Okay,
Python and Django, and they've been consistently kind of making a little bit of money over time. And
really
so,
nice.
yeah, I've had a good experience with it.
Okay, and what do you do it on Udemy?
Yeah, those are Udemy courses.
Okay, great. Yeah, yeah, I'd definitely be interested in doing that. Like I said, I'm using this first one as kind of a practice round, or knowing ultimately there are going to be people who followed the tutorial series and were happy with the way it was done, but now want to delve a little bit deeper and go into something like photon quantum, which is not as simple. It's quite a bit more complex. So I think that those people would be prepared to hopefully invest in a Udemy course.
So, with your game design process, did you plan out most of the game at the beginning with like a game design document, or has it just been growing and evolving organically?
Yeah, I know that I probably should use a game design document, but to be honest, I spent a lot of my childhood just when I was bored in class or bored in any situation, I would just sit and think about how I would want my game to be. Once I figured out how I was going to build it, so I all the games that I made before were 2D. I didn't really know anything about 3D until 4 years ago when I started learning how to use Unity. But fundamentally, how everything was going to fit together was always very clear to me because I had mapped it out in my mind for a long time. I used to get very bored in school, so I got in a lot of trouble. So to keep myself busy, I would just sit and think about my game that I was one day going to build. Um, and yeah, so I guess it's helpful to a lot of people to use game design documents. Um, but for me, I really just build it in a way that I feel is right. It's just that it makes sense to me. For me, building a game is more about feeling than anything else. If it doesn't feel right, then it's not fun. So yeah.
So, when it comes to assets for music and sound effects, how are you approaching that?
So I have one artist who we pay some money to, who makes a lot of sound effects for us. And yeah, so we were using Epidemic Sound for some of the songs, the whole soundtrack. In fact, there were 30 tracks that I had selected and we'd been using for a while until recently on Twitter, someone mentioned that you would not be able to use that music on when players were going to stream your game. They would need to get a license for Epidemic Sound as well. And so that's now kind of swayed me away from using their product. That means we currently have 0 tracks. But yeah, we've been in contact recently. Jordan has referred 1 or 2 people that are going to look at making a couple of tracks for us. Yeah, I mean, I'm no musician. My brother's a musician, but I've made a couple of tracks. I'm just not happy enough with any of them to use them. Um, but yeah, I'm hoping to get in contact with some more artists who would like to work on making some songs for the game.
That's cool. I also make music myself,
Wow. Okay.
and on my other YouTube channel, I've been interviewing video game composers and sound designers and stuff. So if you ever,
Okay.
uh,
Brilliant.
I can maybe help you find some
Yeah, that would
people
be
too.
amazing.
You know, I also one time I wrote a blog post about the similarities between music and programming,
Right.
and I found a lot of people find the same thing. Can you talk about that? Have you noticed any similarities or parallels between them?
Not really. I in terms of music production, like making music.
Well, I guess just music and coding as like a thought process and a
Well,
creative
what I
thing.
can say is I cannot code unless I have some EDM playing in my earphones. I simply just cannot focus. I just can't bring myself to writing the code. There's something about music that seems to just turn everything on and make everything make sense. And then it sort of just starts to become second nature. Um, yeah, I think that it's very important, of course, for music to be cohesive with the gameplay. I think it makes a huge difference if you're just sitting in silence and trying to play a game versus actually playing the music that came with the game. It kind of gives you a different level of immersion. Um, so, yeah, I'm a bit disappointed about all my tracks not being able to be used because I really spent a lot of time handpicking those. But at least I suppose I have a good idea of what style of music I want to go for.
Yeah, they would make great reference tracks
Right.
for whoever is going to make the music for you.
Yeah.
What instruments do you play or what kind of music do you like to make?
Well, I can play the piano a bit. I can probably play 4 or 5 songs. But I'm no pro. Like I say, my brother is the musician. He's been producing music and performing live for a long time. But yeah, I never really got into it. I made a couple of songs on. I don't know if you remember a program called EJ. There was a really cool program called EJ that you could make some electronic dance music with, and that was about 25 years ago. They came out, or maybe 30. I made a couple of tracks with that, but also those tracks were lost, so I also gave up on on that sort of thing. And yeah, I just have a lot of fun making music with, just using some loops and just putting them together on Audition. I don't even use FL or Sonar or any of the cool programs, Cakewalk. I don't use any of that stuff. I just, just like mixing a couple of sounds together and, yeah, just doing like a multi-track layout in Audition, really. Nothing fancy.
With your game and your development, have you been using AI throughout any of the process, even just for asking it about like your tools or
You know, it's interesting because when LLMs started becoming popular a few years ago, I was very excited about them. The moment someone showed me ChatGPT, I was like, "Wow, this is incredible! I can't believe how amazing this is." But let me make sure I understand what's going on here. So, that someone showed me, "Look, you can make a tic-tac-toe game." I said, "Oh, that's cool. What about if I want to make a tic-tac-toe game that uses chess pieces instead?" So they said, well, try it. So I tried it and I looked at the pseudocode and I was very impressed. I really thought this is the future. Um, but the more I used it, the more I realized it's mostly marketing. And yeah, I think Linus Torvald said it's 90% marketing, 10% functionality, or something like that. Yeah, I lean more towards that opinion. I've noticed a lot more that it's a lot of hype, to be honest. There is some utility in it, and I think it can be useful for reference, but you better make sure you fact checked every part that you do use. Uh, because I actually made a Twitter post that got like 150,000 impressions that a lot of people didn't like. But it was saying, guys, please don't use ChatGPT for game dev. And that was because what it recommended I do in one point was to to call the update method. I think it was like it on a fixed update. It was like it did an invoke every 0.01 seconds, which called the update loop. So in Unity, which I replied to, I said, do you not have any idea what this would do? And it said, yes, you're right. Sorry, I shouldn't have recommended that. So I screenshotted that and posted that, and that got some attention. But I think it was around at that point where I decided I'm not going to use this stuff anymore, because I think it's dumbing me down a bit, and it's not making me think for myself. And then it's also causing more bugs for me than it's getting any productivity. So no, that's my answer.
Back to the multiplayer aspect, I was wondering how you're dealing with the matchmaking and how you connect with other players to play.
Right. I'm building my own matchmaking system. So it's just going to run on a basic SQL database, which is going to assign users MMR like you have in StarCraft. And yeah, I'm just going to try to match people as closely as possible to their skill level, which you'll have to then build up with each match that you play. I'm really just going to start out very simple and say, win a match, you get 50 points, lose a match, you lose 35, that sort of thing. And yeah, I guess I'll just fine tune it as it goes. I think in the beginning, when you're building traction for the game, it's less important because there aren't that many people playing. So you kind of just want to play with anyone who wants to play it at that time. But I'm planning on building it in case people like the game a lot during Next Fest. I will be building it so that the matchmaking is pretty accurate, and make sure that you get paired up with people close to your skill level.
And right now, is it just 1v1?
Yeah, right now you create a room, and it'll be a list in a list of rooms, and you can just join that room, or you can join with an access code from a friend that they gave you. But I'll be integrating it with Steam, so you'll be able to play with your friends on Steam as well.
Are there going to be any cheat codes for the single player version?
The cheat codes on Age of Empires were amazing. I love typing laser and getting cool stuff. I'm not planning on adding anything like that just yet. But yeah, I don't see why not on the single player. I think it always adds a little bit of fun. If you really don't want to wait until your workers have mined 10,000 serum, for instance, you could just type a code and get some serum. So I don't see any harm in adding that at a later point.
Before we go, is there anything else you'd like to share or plug?
No, I just, generally I just want to encourage game developers or aspiring game developers to really just try, and not be afraid of doing things the wrong way. I see a lot of people really being passionate about wanting to build a game, but really just being too scared of the scrutiny they'll get from people in the community. And I want them to know that it's actually a lot easier than you think. If you're prepared to struggle a bit for a long while, then you'll figure it out. It's just a matter of time. But yeah, other than that, thanks very much for having me, and thanks for making the time.
Well, for those of the people who want to find you, what is your X handle and your YouTube page?
Matt Game Dev Guy, Matt with a double T, and it's the same for the YouTube page as well.
Excellent. And I'll link those as well. So,
Appreciate it.
hey, thank you for the time. It
Yeah,
was
thanks
great
very
talking
much.
to you and learning about the game, and good luck, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks very much. Talk soon. Bye.